Hello, how are you doing?
Good. How are you? I
Pretty
love
good.
background.
Thank you very much. This is one of the features that I really like about Zoom. So, Teacher Firuzeh, speaking of motivation, how can we motivate language learners as teachers?
That's a great question.
Thank
I think what we need to start with is motivation. If you are a motivated teacher, if you're a passionate, driven, motivated teacher, then you can motivate other people. If you're in this just because you have nothing better to do, or, a lot of native speakers do that. I don't want to knock native speakers. But a lot of times, native speakers become English teachers because, it's a skill they already have and they think they can just go and teach it. But it requires a lot of knowledge and also a lot of motivation.
you.
So first of all, you need to be passionate about this process to be able to make other people motivated and passionate about it too. It's like, it's contagious when you're passionate about something, when you find something something really interesting, then you can transfer this passion to other people. I would say for different people, it's different. It's easier to get some people motivated than others. I always love this quote that says, you are only as interesting as you are interested in things. So
Wonderful.
A lot of times people are naturally more interested in different things. Like they love sports and they love science and they get excited about TED Talks, they get excited about books, they get excited about astronomy, like all these different fields of study and interests. So some people are more intrinsically motivated and interested in things.
Nice.
But I would say something you can help with is to find that thing that the person is interested in and passionate about, and use English as a means to an end to motivate that person. So a person is hugely interested in cooking, something as simple as cooking, right? So you would use the recipes and the different names of foods and ingredients and all these dishes and utensils that you use for cooking as a way to expand their vocabulary and to teach them sentence structure. So I would say the motivation really depends on what the person is interested in, and if you can figure it out in discussion with the other person, with the student. Sometimes it becomes more difficult when it's in a group setting. In a group, people might have different interests, so you have to dig in a little deeper. Sometimes it's impossible because it's like at the college that I used to work at, we had like a set curriculum. Like a few years back, we had a set curriculum, so there was not a lot of leeway. There was not a lot of maneuver room for me to want to pick the different resources that I liked and my students liked. So the materials that we use is really important. And also, if you can find a reason why that person through English can become a better person or a better, employee, or become better at their job. If you can help them learn English and use lectures and talks and resources to become better at their job. So to have a certain goal other than just wanting to learn English, because I think this as an end, as a goal, is a bad goal. Let's just become really good at English. Why? Why do you want to become good at English? Because you want to apply to better jobs, because you want to apply to a good university, because this is sometimes an outlandish goal. I think some people find it bizarre when I first mention it, but I think you can also use learning English and teaching English to acquire a new character that you want. You want to acquire a more confident and outgoing and sociable character. So how can you use English to do that? You just try and speak more freely and not care about your mistakes, and just a completely different outlook on the kind of person you are. Just forget about the person you are in your first language. In English, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to tumble and stumble for your words. So acquiring a new character, we can get into detail about that. Some people find it like a vague idea, but we can definitely make it more tangible.
Wonderful. Thank you. I like that actually. Perfect. Uh, it says here, what is the difference between young learners and adults?
Okay.
Is there any
Another very
difference?
good question.
Mhm.
You know, I would say in general, people's psychological and emotional and intellectual age is much more important than their physical age,
Mhm.
right? So you see a lot of 50-year-old people who behave like or think like a teenager. You know, they have interests that are more similar to a teenager.
Mhm.
And you see teenagers who are really mature and sophisticated, and um, so they have a completely different character and they're more mature. So when it comes, going back to your first question about motivation, I think it is also related to that, because for an adult to get motivated, you sometimes need to work on more mature and more sophisticated materials. Sometimes not so much,
Mhm.
because they don't have so many different varied interests or sophisticated interests.
Mhm.
For teenagers, the topics, or the kids, the topics should be less deep and more, let's say,
Enjoyable.
related to entertainment,
Mhm.
enjoyable,
Mhm.
fun. Exactly. Again, depends, because there are a lot of teenagers who just dig the sophisticated and
Exactly.
intellectually stimulating
Mhm.
ideas.
Mhm.
So it really depends. That's one aspect of it. The materials that you want to use, you have to really um, kind of modify it in order
Mhm.
to adjust it for your audience. Another one is related to persons. You know, learning a language is a psychological process. What does it mean? Like the idea that a person has about making mistakes, just this one very thing. A lot of people in their first language, in anything they do, they find mistakes to be horrendous things that could happen to them.
Mhm.
They describe their mistakes as being embarrassing or mortifying, or like they feel really, really bad about making mistakes, and they
Mhm.
always want to be perfect. They want others to think that they're perfect, that they never make mistakes.
Mhm.
If they make a mistake, they try to kind of conceal it and blot it out and not let other people see it.
Exactly.
So this just mindset about making mistakes.
Mhm.
So in teenagers and younger people, it's a lot easier to convince them that making mistakes is okay.
Mhm.
You know, just make a mistake, make a fool of yourself. I'm gonna make a fool of myself. I'm gonna make myself vulnerable. You
Mhm.
do that too. So it's a lot easier to, if you are aware of that aspect of learning a language or teaching a language, it's easier to work with a teenager. A lot of times there are exceptions. Again, there are some teenagers that are highly insecure, and they hate the idea of making mistakes. They hate the idea of sounding funny. When it comes to pronunciation, a lot of times you have to sound funny in
Exactly.
order to become really good.
Mhm.
So for adults, it's really hard to change them psychologically and emotionally, and to tell them,
Mhm.
no, it's okay to make mistakes if they're not convinced that easily.
Mhm.
If they are open to it, because I sometimes do that with a lot of my students. I give them resources that can affect them psychologically,
Mhm.
make them less insecure, more confident about themselves, more open to the idea that everybody makes mistakes. And this process of learning is the process of making mistakes. So
Absolutely.
psychologically, teenagers are more open to experiencing different things. They're more up for a challenge. They're more
Exactly.
game for the
Mhm.
things that you want to offer and
Mhm.
you want them to do. Sometimes, a lot of times, adults are more they're more set in their own ways. They're stricter, right?
Exactly. Of course.
And that's another aspect. What else can I say? So
It is
adults and
absolutely complete answer, actually.
because there are other aspects that we can also discuss,
Of
but
course.
I think for this question it would
Yeah,
just suffice to that.
exactly. Uh, it says that what are the probable problems of students while they are studying and learning? I'm sure that
Okay.
a lot of people, let's say students, come to you and they are complaining about their, for example, studying methods or style. I'm sure about it.
Exactly.
So,
Sure,
what do you
sure.
think? I mean, these problems could be.
Okay. So going back to the last question, the topic of mistakes, like the psychological mindset of people, the mindset that people have about this process, because a lot of it is about how willing are you to make mistakes and to repeat something that is not perfect, to keep practicing when you're not perfect, when you're not making a lot of mistakes. So as I said, it's a psychological journey. It's an emotional process. It's not only, some people look at it more robotically and like mechanically in a different way, but I'll always say speaking is the most psychological and emotional thing that you can have, because you know, a kid starts learning to speak at 2, and it's just something that is with you from the very early ages. So the person's mindset about mistakes and about wanting to try something new. Another problem that I find highly problematic and very, very common, it might be very controversial for me to say that, because there are a lot of teachers on Instagram, on YouTube, this process of learning through a first language. I think it's hugely detrimental. It's really inhibiting, very limiting to this process. It is a really bad idea to want to use translation in order to learn a first language. A lot of times people do it. I've talked to people who are native speakers, and I mean, English is their first language, but they can also speak another language as their second language, actually. Yes. And they have, like in their own classes, they only use English to teach English. But on Instagram, they're using another language to teach English because they say it's more popular. People like it more. Yeah. Despite the fact that it's not more beneficial, it's not more advantageous. So I think this is a huge problem. People thinking that they can master a language through their first language. I personally have never seen anyone like that. I know teachers whose English is great. Okay, I'm not questioning that. And their teaching is also, I'm not going to say their teaching is great, because they use that style, they use that method of translation and using the first language to teach the second language. And they have done it so much, they have just translated so much through their teaching and learning life, their teaching careers and their learning life, that they're not actually able to speak English for an hour on, like continuously for an hour, because their mindset is just so used to wanting to translate all the time and not being able to just speak English. So I would say I could talk about this for hours on. You know, I can talk about the scientific research that exists out there, the mechanism of your brain, the dynamics that happen in the brain that help you speak a language. And I can give you a lot of evidence. I can talk about my personal experience for hours on about how bad it is. But I would just say, if you really want to learn English, don't do that. It's just so detrimental. Perfect. So that could be another problem. Another problem, I would say the biggest problem, I mean, that could also be a big problem if people are doing that, but I would say the biggest problem is that people are not putting it as a priority. Like people not thinking that they can, people thinking that they can become really good and fluent and articulate in a language when they have not set it as one of their top priorities. I'm not saying that it should be your priority number 1, but at least amongst the first 10 items you have on your list of priority. You have to give it your time, you have to give it your attention. It needs to be a daily practice. So that, I think, is like another problem, that people don't give it enough time and attention and expect to just automatically learn it.
Exactly. Yeah, perfect. Definitely. And it says, what sort of material would you recommend them to use? Like books, apps, websites, referring to your personal experience.
That's a great aspect of learning and teaching, being able to pick the right materials. It also goes back to the question of how to get someone motivated. So it really depends on the person's interests. So the way I practice my own English is through talks and books and materials that are about the human mind and human psychology, and also some other majors some other fields that I'm interested in, like astronomy and let's say, sometimes some other different fields. So you have to pick the materials that are suited to you, to your interest, and what you're passionate about. And then the level is really important. So you have to pick the materials that is right for the level. And how you gauge that is that, so first it depends how welcoming a person's attitude is towards a challenge. Because if you have a person who has a lot of tolerance for discomfort and difficulty and challenge, then you can give them materials that are like 2-3 levels above their own level. We say in linguistics, we say it should be +1. It should be 1 level above your level, grammatically and vocabulary wise and all. But sometimes you can challenge people a little bit more based on your level. We can give them like things that they don't understand half of, and then they go and try to figure out and guess and understand. I always include, so it needs to be comprehensive. Okay, it needs to include some things that are essential. You need to cover vocabulary, we need to cover pronunciation, and we need to also cover grammar, right? Grammar, pronunciation, vocabulary. Well, I always include in my private classes, in my group classes, there's always a grammar book. And then sometimes you need a pronunciation book. Sometimes I introduce my own videos. I ask people to go watch my videos for the pronunciation points. So it should be multifaceted, and all these different aspects of English included in that curriculum.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, speaking of grammar, actually, the question is, grammar or vocabulary? Which one is important and why? Plus, how can learners improve their grammar and vocabulary? I mean, expanding their vocabulary. Yes.
That's a very important question that needs to be answered really accurately and correctly. Grammar and vocabulary are both important. They're like the building blocks of what you're saying and what you're writing. Okay. So these are the ingredients that you're using. You can't pick one of them. Grammar is related to how accurate you are, how correct you are, and how well people can understand you. Because if you're making too many mistakes in the structure of your sentences, sometimes it gets in the way of people understanding what you're saying. What you're saying doesn't sound comprehensible, right? And also, accuracy is always important. If you care about how truthfully you're speaking, how accurately you're speaking, if you're not lying, that's an aspect of truthfulness. You should also care about the accuracy of your speech, because a lot of times people say, well, grammar is not important, it's just important to be able to communicate. But if you're talking to someone and you're making mistakes, and those mistakes just stand out, if you're making a sentence, and I'm thinking as a listener, and a lot of times native speakers do that because it's not fluid what you're saying. There are mistakes. So these mistakes are going to stand out. And what the person is going to pay attention to is the mistakes that you're making, not your message. Okay, the person is saying, oh, why did he say to child? If you're talking to someone and you say to child, the person is it's something that disturbs the person's ease of understanding. So it disturbs your communication. It disrupts your message. So you're sacrificing something that is really important. So I would say grammar is really important as the aspect of being correct and accurate. And speaking beautifully and nicely and fluidly. And also vocabulary is really important because the vocabulary that you use is what you're using to communicate your ideas. So if you have a wide range of vocabulary, you can communicate subtle and nuanced ideas. A lot of times people debate that, oh no, this word is not very common, no one uses it, or people overgeneralize also, no one uses it
anymore. Yes.
But
Old English maybe.
Yes, sometimes some words are actually Old English, but a lot of times having a wide range of vocabulary is about being able to communicate ideas eloquently and articulately and subtly.
Swiftly,
you communicate subtle ideas. Exactly. Like, for example, if I want to say, I couldn't say something, I can also, if I know this word, like I was stumbling for my words.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if I know that, I can use it. If I don't, then I can't use it. I can't communicate as well as I can. So I think there are some questions that people ask and some ideas that people promote that are like really fallacious. They're really erroneous ideas, like bad ideas that people promote. And people just buy into it because it's easy. You know, these words are not common. Let's just, you know, you just need 500 words to be able to communicate. Bad idea, but easy for people to believe because it's comfortable, you know. So I would say grammar is really important. Vocabulary is really important. They're both important, and they have to be practiced and improved at the same time. And the process that you asked about, I have this thing that I call turning your input into your output, the process of using the material to go over and then speak about it and write about it. This is the only process that I think a person can learn a language excellently and master it. You know, listening to things only, doing it halfway is not going to make you a great speaker. It's never going to make you a great speaker. Listening to podcasts and audiobooks and watching movies, these are all great. I'm not saying that they're bad, but it's just half of the process. And if you do a process halfway, we call it half-assed, then you're never gonna make it to the place that you're going to be able to speak articulately and eloquently, or even to speak, like to communicate. So the process is using materials, listening and reading materials, and then speak about it, like give a summary of it, talk about it, describe it, give an account of it, ask and answer questions. If you have a partner, like studying partner, or if you have a teacher, or if you're in class, this should be the cycle of turning your input, getting your input, and then changing it into output. This is what I do in my classes all the time, depending on going back to the person's passion and interest, like choosing the materials to do this with.
Fantastic. Very complete. And okay, the question is, how did you personally learn English?
I have studied English literature and English teaching, but I was really interested in English and reading everything in English and listening to a lot of things. I mean, back then there were no podcasts or there was no YouTube. So people should be really grateful, in parentheses, people should be really grateful for all these amazing resources that we have for free these days, and people just take them for granted. So we didn't have those, but we had like series and movies. So I read a lot of books in English. I listened to things in English, and I was really interested in learning the things that I wanted to learn through English, you know, not using Farsi, which is my first language. I mean, I love Farsi too. I love Farsi literature and the poetry and the verse and everything. So I also love that, and I'm fascinated by that too. And I also read that, and kind of that's one of my hobbies too, one of my interests.
Of course.
But then I used English to learn the things that I wanted to learn, to practice things that I wanted to practice. And I've also studied it academically, but that was not the big part of maybe the things that I know.
Comes from
like maybe 10% of them I've learned at university or through courses and classes.
Of course, yeah, exactly. You know, mostly people actually study on their own, and they self-taught normally. You know, those people who are using English as a second language, basically they are doing as you actually we did. It says here, is it possible to learn multiple languages at the same time? Would you recommend that?
I'm not really the best person to answer that, because I don't know a lot about that. But my personal experience has been that there was a time that I wanted to learn French. I mean, we had it at school, at university, we had French courses, and I was motivated enough to go and buy extra books and Actually, I had also two victims that I taught French to when I was learning it. Whatever that I learned, they say teaching is the best way to learn. So whatever that I learned, I taught the two private students that I had. So for me, that was not enough experience to rely on, enough personal experience. But I don't think it was like really limiting. It was not interfering with my English learning, right? I don't know a great deal about that. I think going back to the priority issue, if you want to really master something, you have to make it a priority. You have to give it your time and attention. And it is really difficult to have two priorities, I would say. Exactly. So just focusing on one thing is a lot better than doing multiple things haphazardly. You know, doing one thing completely and as much as you can, as enthusiastically as you can, is a lot better than dividing your attention and doing things more separately. Let's say incompletely.
Yes, definitely correct. Yes. And are you tired right now?
I'm not tired. No, we could go on for how long has it been?
I don't know. Actually, a couple of questions left.
Sure.
Yeah, very cliche question. How can learners improve their speaking abilities?
So exactly the cycle that I was talking about, that is actually a great question, but there are just so many ideas out there that are just wrong and bad ideas. What I think from my personal experience and the pedagogy of English learning, like the way that you scientifically use to learn English and learn any language, is through this cycle that I was talking about. You get your input from the environment, like what a 2-year-old does, right? So a 2-year-old only has listening. So what I mean by input skills is the skills that you get from the environment. So listening and reading. As an adult, you have an advantage because you also have the reading skill that you can use. A child uses listening for 2 years of your life. So they just listen. They're just listening to the environment. And then they start repeating. They start mimicking, right?
Definitely.
So this is exactly what we as adults should do, but in a more granular and detailed and more, let's say, academic way. So we have the input skills of listening and reading. And then you have the output skills. Your output is what you produce, what you make, right? So what do you make? You're speaking, the sentences that you make, and you write, right? You're writing. So whenever you want to speak, and then remember the two great ingredients that you also asked about, grammar and vocabulary. So you use context to absorb grammar and vocabulary from, and also information along with it, information, and then you turn it into your output. So this is the way I teach grammar in my classes. I never like stand there and say, okay, let's talk about present perfect. Present perfect is this, that, and then now this is my example. What's your example? Sometimes you do that like alongside other things, but that's not the major way that I do it. What I do is that if I want to teach someone present perfect, I ask them the day before or the week before to go over the internet and to go over grammar books. And I always introduce best grammar books in the market to them. And I ask them to find whatever they can, find out whatever they can about present perfect. Okay, so what is present perfect? What tense is it? What are some examples? What are some functions and usages of it? And then they come and they speak about present perfect. So we're practicing speaking, we're practicing grammar, and we're practicing structures at the same time, right? So they get their input from the grammar books and the videos they watch on YouTube or wherever. They gather the information from the input skills, and then they talk about it and turn it into output. So they talk about present perfect. This is how we use it. I ask them questions, they answer. So this is how they practice speaking. You know, that was an example that I made about the most boring thing that people find. People find grammar to be really boring, but not necessarily. It doesn't have to be boring.
Yeah.
And then we're going to talk about how we can talk about great ideas using present perfect, right? So for example, who has been the most amazing person you have ever met in your life? So very interesting language exchange.
Exactly.
Right? Using that grammar. So this is the way you practice your speaking. You use listening and reading to absorb information, and then you talk about it.
Fantastic. Yes, definitely. Now the topic is about, the question is about accent and pronunciation. I receive this question a lot, which accent, which pronunciation, American English, British English. So what do you think about this?
So accent is someone's accent is the pattern of their pronunciation. Okay. So when someone says, I want to have a good accent, sometimes people say, I want to have a native accent or a native-like accent.
Yeah.
I would say native-like is something that is definitely doable and achievable. You can have that if you're familiar with these patterns and you practice them enough. In terms of which accent, I would say it depends on the people's preference. You know, if you like the British accent better, if I had to probably start it all over again, I might just start with British accent because I find it really beautiful and melodic and melodious. It sounds really nice. But you have to stick to one because accents have very different pronunciation patterns. You can't mix them up. If you really want to become good at one accent and one pattern of pronunciation, because it's also confusing for the audience.
Exactly.
The way you speak, if you have wrong vocabulary, it's confusing for the audience. If you have the wrong pronunciation patterns, it might be confusing. It kind of diminishes your message. Anything that gets in the way. If your pronunciation is really odd or bizarre or like incongruent with what you're saying, then that is something that stands out. So you want to have a natural accent, right?
Exactly.
So you pick your own preference, but then you get really detailed and meticulous about all these patterns that we have. Like, for example, we say we have different sounds, we have consonants and vowels, and we have different kinds of vowels. We have this long vowels and short vowels that, for example, in other languages, in a lot of other languages, we don't have. Like, there's no difference between a long vowel and a short vowel. So it doesn't matter if you pronounce. But in English, it's hugely important because it makes a huge difference in the meaning of the word. So, for example, if I say bog and bug, these are two different words. So all these different nuances are important. So if you have the knowledge of them and if you practice all these different points, then you can have a good natural accent.
Exactly. Yes. Very nice. Students mostly say, is it possible to learn English without going abroad?
Of course. Of course it's
How?
possible to. The things that we just discussed, using your input and turn it into your output, in order to practice speaking and writing and all the 4 skills, learning about pronunciation, understanding all these different aspects of pronunciation, the patterns, and practicing them. Nothing about them has anything to do with living in a different country. I know people who have been living in the US, like I personally know people here who've been living in LA for 40 years, 50 years, and they can't speak English. It doesn't matter where you live. It matters what you do, your daily habits, your practices, what you're doing with your language matters. And I think it is a ridiculous question sometimes that people ask. I mean, I'm glad that you asked it because it is so important that people think, oh no, I want to go to this country and then start learning English. I can't learn it without being in the country. I just don't find any truth in that. I mean, it might be sometimes if you're a really sociable person and you're living in a country and you are practicing all these things, and then you go out and you socialize with people and you practice your speaking. But nowadays, to be honest, with like the prevalence of internet and just having this Zoom conversation, having a Skype conversation is actually more common than just going to a cafe and wanting to talk to a stranger.
In a
you can have
virtual way,
virtual friends. Exactly.
Yes, perfect. Very good. And how long will it take for a person to really learn every necessary element of language to speak properly?
Okay, so this question of how long it'll take is, again, a very common question.
Exactly.
And also the answer depends on a lot of different things. So the first thing is your motivation, your drive, your motivation. The very first thing that is kind of included in this is the fact that you're willing to make it a priority. Are you willing to make English and studying English and learning English your priority? Are you willing to give it an hour of your time every single day? So I, for example, tell my students that I can offer you the best strategies and the best methods that you're going to need to learn and to become really great, okay, at English. But do all of them take advantage of it? No. A lot of times they just give up. They pay for their classes and they don't show up. And I ask them to go over the materials at least every hour, like 1 hour every day. And they don't do that. So they don't put in the time and the effort. So they're not willing to sacrifice their comfort and their hobbies and their other priorities for this. Knowing the right strategy and using the right materials and getting good quality education, that again is very easy these days with the prevalence of internet. And just knowing that this is just turning your input into your output, so you can do it on your own. You can just record your own voice and do this process day in, day out. So knowing the right strategy, making it a priority, and just putting in the time and attention and effort.
Exactly.
Those are the factors that influence how long it will take. Sometimes people ask me, like, do you guarantee this? I say, I don't guarantee anything. I tell you that you can try my classes. You can listen to what I ask you to do. And then I think that if you do this for, I don't know, 6 months, you're going to be in a place that you can't believe. You won't be able to believe in 6 months. If you put in an hour a day, 2 hours a day, you do all these practices, do I guarantee that you're going to stop watching TV and talking to your friends in Farsi the whole day? No, I can't guarantee that. It's on you. It's up to you what you want to do with your time and attention.
Exactly. Definitely correct. Yeah. And the final question. Technology and education, useful or harmful?
Technology and education,
the
are
integration
both
of technology and education, or
the integration of technology and education is a fantastic thing that people have these days that I didn't have growing up, like I don't know, 15 years ago, when I was like really trying to get the best information and knowledge and want to learn a lot about a lot of things, not only English. And I didn't have this advantage that I do now, that I use the technology like podcasts and audiobooks and these amazing sources of information and knowledge. So if you are able to use it wisely and to manage what you're doing with your life and with the technology in your life, it's just an unbelievable privilege that we have. But if it's us that make things detrimental or negative. So like movies are great, but are you going to watch like 10 hours of them and watching movies that won't add anything to your life? Some people do that. Like they spend their time watching series and movies that are not really are not going to add anything to their character, their personality, their understanding of the world. So it's really your choice what to do with the technology that we have.
Fantastic. It was really awesome, really.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you.
very
Thank
much.
you. Of
So
course.
let's
My
say
pleasure.
goodbye to our audience, right? So have a good time.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.